An Honorable Profession is brought to you by OpenCounter.com. OpenCounter builds tools for local governments to deliver permits and licenses online. Their portals make complex permitting simple, which lowers transaction costs, increases transparency, and empowers economic development. OpenCounter is a vital tool for communities big and small across this nation. Check out OpenCounter.com to see what they can do for your community. Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm your host, Ryan Coonerty. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that identifies rising stars in the Democratic Party at the state and local level. I've been fortunate enough to be a New Dealer for years, first when I was mayor of Santa Cruz, and now as chair of the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors. We've been doing this podcast for a year now, and I encourage you to check out some of our previous episodes with great leaders like Mayor Pete, Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford, and candidate for U.S. Senate in Texas, Amanda Edwards. You can find us at newdealleaders.org or wherever podcasts are found. And if you like what you hear, please tell your friends. We're trying to bring sanity to politics in an insane era. We need all the help we can get. 2020 is going to be a huge political year, but it would be a big mistake to only focus on the battle for the presidency and the Senate. Democracy is still won and lost at the community level. Today I talk with three new mayors who should give you a lot of hope for the future. We have Lincoln, Nebraska Mayor Leirion Gaylor Baird, Montgomery, Alabama Mayor Stephen Reed, and Wichita Mayor Brandon Whipple. You may remember previous episodes with both Leirion and Stephen. If you haven't listened, I encourage you to go back and hear their incredible stories. These were three people that I spent much of 2019 cheering on, so it's exciting to have them in one place. Leirion, Stephen, and Brandon, welcome to An Honorable Profession. This is an opportunity for us to hear from three new mayors. I don't know about all you, but I've been checking random county clerk sites to see the results of all their elections over the course of a year. And we want to give them a big round of applause for their elections. We have Wichita, Kansas, Mayor-elect Brandon Whipple. We have Lincoln, Nebraska, current Mayor Leirion Gaylor Baird. And we have Montgomery, Alabama Mayor Stephen Reed. Thank you all for joining us. So I want to start because each of you has a unique path into this role, and I want to talk first about your path, and then we'll talk about what you're going to do when you get there. So, Brandon? Well, first, thanks for having me. I've been a New Deal leader for, I think, since 2013. This conference is one of the conferences I get the most out of. Really being able to network with some of the best minds in our country when it comes to local and state politics and policy has been a blessing for me. So thank you. It's a lot for me to actually be on the stage and giving my experience as well. I'm really probably the least likely person, if you were to ask a year ago who was going to be the next mayor of Wichita, which is the 48th largest city in our country, that anyone would guess. Really, I had no plans to run for mayor. I got a call for the Democrats, and I kind of laughed it off. And then I got and really their pitch was, we asked everyone else, and everyone else said no. And I'll tell you, it's always a good pitch, right? And I felt like there's probably some old guard Democrat who's worked his way into this position, who's been around forever, and I need to let that person go forward. And it made me realize my age, because it turned out I was that person. I was the old Democrat whose turn it was to put my name in the hat. But I kind of ignored it until I got calls from Republicans who also had a very similar perspective, not so much as no one else would do it, but as we need a new vision, a new idea. So I got into the race after considering it with my wife after that, and we ran up against an incumbent and an establishment Republican who was supported by pretty much the money in the city. And we made it through with about 400 votes in a 9-way primary.
and we were out of money. We were moving forward. We were having a hard time getting some of the main players who I've worked with as a state legislator, getting them back on board. And really, we had to take a completely different strategy. We knew we couldn't beat them. And this sounds nerdy. I follow kind of Tudor history and War of the Roses history. And my team follows Game of Thrones, so we use a lot of these analogies. We're like, we couldn't meet them in the field, on television and on mail, because we didn't have the same resources. So we really use, my team's called Ad Astra, and they are somewhat of an outsider group with the Kansas Democratic Party. They had a chip on their shoulder, and then, of course, me, being someone who I didn't think would make it this far, had a chip on my shoulder when it came to having a good showing. And we really use social media to an extent that's never been used in Kansas, in a very smart way that I hope to get into more details with, but I don't want to monopolize the time. But it's that was really the key, was to mimic the interaction that we have at the door with people utilizing social media. So not only would we do targeting, and my manager, her name's Casey, her whole advice to me was be normal, be the normal candidate. When I would show up to a parade in slacks and a button-up shirt and it's over 100 degrees and I'm doing it because I look young, she would say, like, this isn't what normal people do. And so we would utilize social media. We would want to show up to events, be normal. And the last thing I'll leave you with before I pass it along is we had a saying called "Win the Day," where instead of looking at the campaign, looking at fundraising, looking at all the events, if we looked at it longer than what we had to do today, it seemed like too much. So at the end of the day, we said, do we win today? And sometimes with the earned media or with the different variables that happens in campaignings, we didn't really win today, but I don't know if we took much damage, or yeah, we definitely won today, or I'm pretty sure my opponent knows he didn't win today. So that was what kept us going, was just trying to win that day, get through the day, and get on to the next day.
Leirion?
The Game of Thrones reference made me want to just say that for those of you who have trouble pronouncing my name, it rhymes with Tyrion. And I grew up the daughter of 2 public school teachers. And so as a child who saw grown adults come up to my parents and thank them for the difference they made in their lives when they were students, I really wanted a career that had meaning, that really tried to make people's lives better. And for the earlier part of my career, it was more focused on education and trying to level the playing field by serving in communities that didn't have good public school systems. When I became a parent myself and moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, I didn't envision a future in politics, but I started getting involved in my community. This was the place where I was raising my children, and I started as a community volunteer, and I ended up being asked to serve on the Planning Commission. And I think that this idea that we reach out and empower our residents to get involved is a really powerful one, because that was really my pathway forward. Being on the Planning Commission and learning about how you grow a city in a smart and sustainable way led to being encouraged to run for city council. And after that, I saw how few women were involved in these decisions at the local level, or at any level really in politics, and wanting to make sure that my kids and your kids, they see women behind the microphone in these political settings, was a really big motivator for me to take those steps and step into an arena where I didn't necessarily feel comfortable. It was not, like I said, something that I had thought that I would do. But the power of encouragement is also, this idea that you carry as you climb. A previous mayor had said to me, this is something you should really think about doing. Those kinds of comments actually matter a lot to those of us who maybe hadn't thought about this role for ourselves. And I'm very pleased now that I see a lot of little girls in the community and their moms bring them up to meet me, and I know that they're looking at me not as me, Leirion Gaylor Baird, but as me, a sense of possibility, a sense of what women are capable of achieving. And so while I care very much about the quality of life in my community and what we can do as a mayor, it's also what we can do and what we can inspire in others as a sense of possibility that makes me really excited about my new role.
Stephen?
Good morning. One of the things I guess for me getting into the mayor's race was really a sense of not seeing the progress that I wanted to see in my city. I'm a child of people who've been in public service for decades, since the 60s, in the sit-in movements in Montgomery, Alabama. So when you grow up, kind of a politician's kid, or you grow up a preacher's kid, it's much the same. You either want to go into the family business or you want to get as far away from it as you can. So I was on the spectrum of wanting to get as far away from it, which is why I went to college out of state, lived out of state, never planned to come back, went into a totally different field, only to find out my plan wasn't God's plan. And so I finally had to listen to that as I came back, because after maybe 10 years of being back in my hometown, I just didn't see the type of progress and the type of political courage that I thought was necessary to really benefit and impact people all across our community. And after trying to fund campaigns, strategize on campaigns for everything from school board to other mayor's offices, other mayoral elections, I was trying to get people to run. And so, a friend of mine just kind of said, well, Stephen, if you think it's so important that good people run, why don't you do it? And so, I just kind of flippantly said, well, I just
sound
might.
like a good friend.
Yeah, sounds like a good friend, right? So I was like, I just might. And, at the time, I didn't have any plans on running. And what I saw was just kind of decision after decision being punted. And this wasn't partisan. It wasn't racial. It wasn't even generational. It was just consistently down the board, down the line, people not wanting to make decisions, whether that was regarding our public schools, whether it was regarding our justice system, or just basic things that, were just mundane tasks that they just wouldn't do. And so out of that frustration, I decided to run in 2012 for probate judge, and I served there until running for mayor this year. And I would have continued to serve there, but for the fact I didn't like the names I was hearing from people who were running for mayor. Most of them were opportunists. Most of them wanted a title. Very little of them had any sense of service in the community itself. And I didn't think they really were in it for the people. And what I decided was, after kind of hearing some names, I said, well, one, I can beat all of them like a drum. That's number one. Number two, I don't think they bring any, moral or political values to the table that are going to advance us where we need to go. And three, I think that we can do a lot better than just accepting another status quo leader. And that's what we had was just kind of keep things comfortable and keep the same people in the positions and keep the machine going the way it had been going. And that just wasn't enough for me, seeing what was happening in so many other cities. Many of them, those of you who are in this room, are leading. And I was like, I know we can do better. And I was really like, I know we can do better than these clowns who are up here, and likely would win, but for a strong candidate with some ideas and with an aspirational message for our community, because that's what had been happening. And so that was also stagnating our progress, in my opinion. And so I put my name in the hat, and we had a great message, I think, of opportunity and unifying the city itself. The message of live, learn, and earn was something that I kind of picked up at a Third Way conference that I was invited to a couple of years ago. And it really talked about some of the centrist narratives and ideas that were reaching people. And I think that was something that really helped propel our campaign. We had a very strong social media presence. That was kind of more the whipped cream and cherry on top for me. I come out of a mindset of canvassing and going door to door, because that's pretty much how I grew up. I tell people all the time, we were probably knocking on doors before we could, barely ride a bike. So we just kind of were doing that, and I believed in that. But we mixed in a lot of data. We used a lot of that, and we were very intentional and deliberate about the type of campaign we wanted to have, from all of our visuals, our web presence, our social media, but also everything from our signs to our messaging. Everything was intentional. I did not want to run what I would call a mayor's race. I was not going to accept what some people would give to a mayoral race when I knew that they could contribute more. So take, for instance, there was one firm, I knew what they had given the previous mayor. They gave me, their initial donation was 10% of what they had given the last mayor. Now, they didn't think I knew that. So I kind of went back to them and I said, well, listen, I know you all typically give X, Y, and Z, but in these races, you give a little bit more. But for some reason, I didn't hit that spectrum. And so part of that was making sure that we had the resources, because what's not talked about is that black candidates oftentimes have a harder chance and have a harder time raising money. And that's because many of the circles that we're in let me just speak for myself. Friends of mine who have run have not, whether they're in Maryland, whether they've been in Georgia, Alabama, Texas, have not been able to reach out to those same donor networks that other candidates can run from. And I was very straightforward about what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And so we were able to go nationally, we were able to go outside and then come back in to raise the money that we raised. And we raised about $770,000 in this mayor's race, which was just off of our previous mayor who had raised about $850. So it was something that I knew was going to cost a lot of money to generate the amount of turnout that we needed to touch voters 5 to 7 times and to really make sure that we got our message out about why the race was important. But we had to send a message early on that the machine and the status quo was not going to cut off the money and limit us. So we outworked them, and then we were able to use a national network of friends and what I call a underground black political network. I call it the Underground Railroad. So, we went to New Orleans, we went to Atlanta, we went to D.C., we went to Harlem, we went to Birmingham, all these places, and we were able to bring in a lot of money from outside very quickly. And that was one thing that kind of vaulted us in our campaign to the top. And so out of 12 candidates, we finished first with 42%. 10 of them were African American. We finished with 42% in the primary, and then we won with about 2/3 of the votes in the runoff. So all of those things were important, and I bring those data points up because I think there are things that influence and impact elections. They impact your candidate recruitment, and it impacts the type of people that we get involved in the process. Because what the money people thought in Montgomery was, we're not going to get behind Stephen Reed. We're not going to do that because his politics and his leadership and approach is going to be different than what we've expected. And it is. And it's something that should have been done a long time ago. When you think about Montgomery just electing the first black mayor in 200 years, that's insane. But it's not insane if you understand the mindset and the systems behind that. And so for us, it was very important that we send a message in every step along the way of this campaign. And I think now that message has been heard, and we've been having a good couple of weeks now that we've been in office. So I can talk a little bit more about it as we go through this.
Leirion?
I wanted to just add to that idea of encouragement and point out that a big reason I ended up being a mayor is because of the New Deal. I came to this conference maybe for the first time in 2014, and I met Kim Driscoll, the mayor of Salem, one of the first female mayors I'd ever met. And I haven't seen her since, but she made an impression on me. And I've been here and seen the kind of work that these leaders do and realized that it is worth putting yourself out there. It's hard to become a candidate. It's hard to take the next step and be vulnerable and worry about your safety and think about what it means for everyone you care about to have you be a public figure. But the work that Tobias Reed has done as a state treasurer and as a state rep on infrastructure and regional planning, and what I've seen Moreau do for his waterfront in Burlington, and this resilient zoning that you're taking on, the courageous work you're doing, Andrea, it matters. And what Scott Holcomb has done for survivors of domestic assault, I feel so inspired by the people in this room, and I've had people here lift up my sense of what's possible for my community and for me as a public servant. And I don't really think I'd be sitting in this chair without the leaders I've met through the New Deal.
Good job, y'all.
And let me just
Brandon?
briefly add to that. When we were running for mayor, we didn't get, I think, the type of support that some other candidates might have gotten. And it was really this group that helps with that mental battle you might have when you think you're going above and beyond where other people think you should be. Really getting contributions, emails, just support from this group. When something was happening with our campaign, I was able to call Debbie and asked for advice on people to talk to about, for different states or have gone through something similar. This group, as a support group, that is huge because there were times in my campaign where we thought, hey, we're in over our head. And then being able to get the support of people who have done what we were trying to do really meant a lot. So I also just want to add to that, to not undervalue the type of organization this is, where I think with us was a tremendous support network.
Good job, y'all. So I want to ask y'all how it's going as you step into this role. I was mayor of a smaller town, and I know that the learning curve is steep, and there's a different level of expectations. It's almost unique among any other job in the world when you're mayor of a city. So you have that happening, plus, Stephen, you're now on national news talking about your historic election. So how do you add that in when you have the learning curve of the job, the learning curve of the public role, plus national attention while you're trying to do it?
I think that the learning curve is probably one that we've all dealt with, regardless of our positions. You feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, and it's a lot of information coming at you. It's a lot of moving parts. What I try to do is to try to make sure I slow it down, and I understand the fact that it doesn't have to all be done by 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock, but it's one that I can really digest and make sure we're assessing one, its relevance, its impact, and its priority. And if we're doing those things, then we're getting a little bit more, regardless if that's our public safety, if that's our infrastructure, if that's our other parks and recreation, any of those things that are under the city. And so right now, what we've been doing really since the election and during our transition has been just talking to some of the city leaders and some of the city department heads and some of the leaders in the various departments about, hey, what's great here? What don't you like? What can we do a little bit better? Getting some feedback along those lines. And I have a great team and a great support structure around me that's skilled in state government, very experienced in local government, but also some people who have no experience with government. Just doesn't make sense for us to do it this way or not. And what I'm trying to do is kind of piece by piece understand where some of the tripwires are, where some of the high points are, and make sure that we're dealing with that in a way that is productive. And I heard someone say this a little earlier, so that we win the day. And so that after each day, much like the campaign, I know a lot more about the city than I did when I came in that day. One of the things that has been, I think, probably a little more interesting has been maybe some of the media coverage of my race. It's very unique, I guess, for me in trying to balance the tone that we certainly want people to take away who are outside Montgomery versus some of the change that we're trying to create in Montgomery. So it's one of making sure that the message is on point, but we're balancing that. I've turned down way more things than I've done because I realize I can't be everywhere and still understand what's going on in our engineering department. How many roads are we going to be paving over these next 30 to 45 days, and what contracts are being under review, as well as, going from a judgeship to the executive side, dealing with a city council. And the city council is very much the same as it was under the previous administration. So, balancing those relationships is important. And I think that the media side has been something that has been a plus for the city. And we tried to use it as that. It's been a plus for our community as well, but also trying to, set a new narrative for Montgomery and talk about why we won, which was that we bet more so on the future than we did the past. And that's why we ran as strong as we did. And with that, I think there's been a very level response to our approach and the exposure that we've gotten because of the race, but also because of what the citizens voted for. And that was for, the type of change and the type of leadership that they believe we're capable of having in the city, and making sure that we can produce the results that they desire ultimately in the short and long term.
Leirion, I remember like a month after I got elected, after a long day, My wife sent me to the grocery store. I run into Safeway, get some stuff. I'm running out, and I pop the cart up onto the curb in the parking lot. But I get home, and I'm checking my email before I go to bed, and there's a message that says, "I guess the mayor's too good to put his shopping cart back." And it was like, okay, now I realize that I'm going to have these kinds of eyes on me. So now every time I dutifully put the shopping cart back. How is it being in the public role? You have teenagers. How are they adjusting? What's that like?
My teenage son likes to tell his friends that the mayor makes him breakfast. I think that my kids are enjoying it to a certain extent, but largely are very focused on their own lives, as they should be. It is, of course, it's so local. You're working and serving your neighbors and your friends and people who you are in community with on a regular basis. And that's part of what's so great about serving at the local level, is because the difference you're making is felt by your own family and the families of all those people around you. It is strange kind of losing some of the anonymity I enjoyed as a city council person. And there's some security concerns as well. I don't have a detail. I'm not one of those people with someone with a badge and a microphone in his ear waiting outside the room. And we had an issue on the campaign with someone who was taking a kind of disproportionate interest in the campaign. So I'm mindful. I'm a little more mindful of my safety now. I let my husband know when I'm leaving the office, and so that there's someone expecting me and knowing when I'm going to be coming and going. And my staff's a little more attentive to that too. So there's that. But it is nice to bump into people at the grocery store and have them be friendly and say hi. And I find that actually, people say this is a thankless job. People in Lincoln, Nebraska say thank you all the time, and I'm really grateful to them for their kindness. Brandon,
you're still a mayor-elect, but since you know what's coming.
So it's a little strange. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. The 6-year-old is in kindergarten, and his class knows that AJ's dad is mayor, but he won't let me walk him into class because I embarrass him. So I guess he's got that age where, I have to give him hugs and kisses outside the classroom.
Do you embarrass him because you're mayor, or just your existence?
I think, being mayor, I thought, I'm cool now, right? Can I come in and, give you a hug in front of all your friends? But of course, I can't. It is a little strange to have people recognize you a bit more. And being in a state legislature, when you're in a state legislature setting, you're used to that to an extent. There's at least that part where if you tweet something silly, or if you're not courteous, that might come back. That's more intensified as mayor. So when I ran for the state legislature, I gave my entire district my cell phone number. And then as mayor, we did that as well, but we're in a city of over 300,000 people, opposed to my legislative district's about 22,000 people. More people call me and text me. So that's also interesting, where I was asked by the media what I think about this one issue, and I said, well, we need more input from the public. And then I get a voicemail where in the paper said you need more input, I don't like it. And so I mean, it's going to take some getting used to, I think. As far as the learning curve goes, I get to walk into a very experienced city council who are all of the opposite party except for one person, and I got to say, I think this is an opportunity for me for a couple of reasons. Being in Topeka, Kansas, where it's a very partisan legislative environment, I kind of joke where I work with people who don't like me all the time. Because in the end, it's not about me and it's not about them. It's about pushing our state forward. And while I think that the city council, these are technically nonpartisan races, this race felt more partisan. And the reason why is because, well, I'm a Democrat, I'm younger, my opponent was a Republican, and he was older and had Republican ideals. And people use partisanship as almost a shortcut to try to figure out where you are in values. So I think partisanship came up because we were two different candidates, and to try to figure out, me being somewhat of more of an unknown citywide, where I stood. Oh, he's the Democrat. But walking into the city council, I think the bar's a little low, because I think they assume partisan politics is what you see on television, which is quite toxic. And really behind closed doors in the legislature, we get things done. So I'm actually looking forward to building those relationships. There will be a bit of a learning curve, but the learning curve as far as working with people, as far as leadership, that won't be as big of a learning curve, I think, as process. And that's because, I'm coming from a legislative environment where you have to get 63 votes. And right now we got to work to get 4 votes to try to push together common sense policies.
I want to ask you that because you all are blue dots in red states. There's a lot of expectations that mayors are going to save the world, but you're not going to get a lot of help from the federal government because they're not getting much done. You're probably not going to get a lot of help from your state governments. How are you going to balance the expectations of what you want to get done with maybe institutional resistance or lack of resources that will come from the higher levels of government? Stephen?
For me, I think that building partnerships beyond Alabama is going to be very important. It's something that we sought to do from day one of our campaign. I always understood that, I understand the politics and the mindset that exists in our state house right now. And while we want to and plan to work with our local delegation and our governor as much as we can, for us to fast forward the change and the progress that's needed in my city, it's going to take corporations and organizations and foundations who really want to make an impact and who really want to see that impact be made in a very tangible way. And so I have thought from day one that we would have to be non-traditional in our approach, whether it's through different initiatives that we want to introduce, or whether that's through different alliances that I believe we have to cultivate in order to maybe bring a little pressure, maybe bring a little motivation to some people who otherwise would not do it, whether that's our state leaders or some of our local leaders. I think for us it's going to be important to have kind of an outside-in strategy and mindset. And I've gotten a lot of that from being here at NewDEAL and listening and learning over the last few years to what other leaders have done here and who they partner with on education, on workforce development, any of those things, even, again, criminal justice and economic development as well. I was just talking to one of my advisors this morning, and we have our internal structure, which is archaic and outdated, and it's one reason why our government is not effective. And so a lot of people have been asking about applying for this job or that job as it stands right now on our books. But those jobs probably won't exist when we're through with our transition plan. If so, they will look a lot different because the jobs and the duties and responsibilities don't fit where the community is now, much less where we want it to be 5 or 10 years down the road. So while we're undergoing that, I expect resistance. I expect there to be obstacles placed in the way because I just think that's how things are. If it's not locally, it'll be state. If it's not state, it'll be somewhere else. And for us, what I want to do is make sure that we have friends and allies outside of that traditional mechanism that will help us try to move the ball forward a little bit. And that's my approach. If I'm surprised by what support I get locally and statewide from some who may be in another party, who may have a different philosophy, then great. My experience has told me whether it was Medicaid expansion, whether it was anything else that made sense for our state to do, our politicians didn't do it. It didn't matter because if it was through a partisan perspective, they weren't going to agree with that in our state house or in our congressional delegation. And so those are things that are going to be very important for us. And I think because there's so much catching up that we have to do, I know it's going to take a multi-layered approach to get it done.
Leirion?
It's a great question because what I witnessed while I was on city council and sitting through long public hearings and long open mic nights was that many people are starting to come to local officials asking for change that's actually only accomplished, or practically can be accomplished at the federal or state level, but they can't get through. And they want local leaders to stand up for them and do something about things over which we have zero legislative or executive authority. So to build on your point, I would say the power of a mayor to convene and to bring together community stakeholders and to try to forge those public-private partnerships is going to be key. We have philanthropic partners in our community foundations and business leaders who recognize that we are feeling this kind of pressure, and I think the more we are able to reach out and develop those relationships before we need them, really to establish and communicate our values and listen to what other people want for the community. To be a thoughtful, responsive leader in that sense is going to be really key to our ability to pull together resources to tackle some of our big challenges. And we're lucky because at the local government, you can actually go out and talk to most of the residents in your community, and people will invest, and they will make sacrifices because they can see results at the local level.
Brandon?
And I agree. I think a mayor's top asset is leadership. It's not authority, and we're not in a strong mayor. We have the dual mayor and city manager in Wichita. So my power is really influence and collaboration more so than just kind of, an executive order type style, which allows opportunities to collaborate, particularly in a city like Wichita. We have an incredible business community, really great nonprofit community, educational institutions. There's ways that we can collaborate to solve some of these problems that isn't just a kind of a top-down policy approach. It could be a bottom-up community approach. Also, I think it's very important, at least my position in one of the assets I have, is my communication with communities, is being out there. We were outspent over 2-1 as far as my general election, but if you took all 9, well, take me out, so all the 8 other candidates who ran for mayor and you add up all their donors, we had more donors, individual donors, than every one of those candidates added up, with over 400 individual donors or unique donors. So that showed that we have wide community support. It just wasn't, it wasn't just in the people who could cut the biggest checks. And also utilizing our social media. My goal is to communicate, to keep people in the loop on what's going on, so there's no surprises when it comes to expectations. And some of our expectations that we put out there are our priorities. Some of them don't cost much money. Wichita, we don't have an ethics commission. It is completely legal to give a elected official a $10,000 check because they're your buddy. And then, they so happen to vote on something later down the line that could help you. So setting up these parameters, these ethics commissions that at the state level I was able to navigate under, because the state has the ethics commission, the city has a loophole where they're out of it. That doesn't cost us anything. So that's going to be a victory once we tackle that, and that shouldn't cost us much resources. And the other thing I campaigned on that's very important is community safety, where we're talking about police officers, we're talking about firefighters. These are popular, common sense type stuff that, regardless of your political ideology, we want to live in a safe community. So that's the next, really the next line on my agenda that I hope to tackle. And I think that, that's got to be, you got to get into the budget a little more, make sure that our first responders have a seat at the table and we're doing it correctly. That's going to take, I think, a little more collaboration. But as far as getting stuff done, as a mayor, being in our first term, we have set very realistic goals. And I think that as long as we communicate the progress of those goals and don't catch anyone off guard, we could be successful in if not achieving those goals in our first year, at least taking the steps forward towards achieving those goals.
Well, I want to thank you. I mean, your all's election in 2019 is one of the most exciting things I've seen in our country in a long time, and I cannot wait to follow what you're up to.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders, and keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Road Group produces this podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep this honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.